Hi, welcome to Night Clerk Radio. This episode tonight is going to be about Vaportrap. I'm Ross Payton, and with me, as always, is Birk.
Hey, it's me, Birk.
Vaportrap is sort of what if Vaporwave had a beat? I guess is the very simple way to put it.
Yep.
It is a combination of sort of the Vaporwave aesthetic with trap music, which is a type of hip hop music. So they've sort of been mashed together to become sort of a single new genre. New is relative. I mean, it's been around for like 5 years now. But we have two albums we're going to be looking at tonight. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the genre itself. I don't listen to as much Vaportrap as I do some of the other genres of Vaporwave, but I do have quite a few albums that I enjoy. I feel sort of like it's a gateway genre to Vaporwave in a lot of ways. If you want to get people into Vaporwave, it's a good way to introduce them. The biggest album is, of course, Blank Banshee Zero. That is sort of the album that is pretty much everyone considers the creator of the genre. It is sort of the one that kind of established it as a thing. And you hear a lot of Vaportrap in the more popular mixes and videos that incorporate Vaporwave. Certainly, I've heard a lot of Vaportrap in the Simpson Wave videos that are very popular on YouTube. That whole thing. It's if you want to get people into it, but you think that they might not be liking music that doesn't have a steady beat, or they're not as used to experimental music, that you could introduce them to Vaportrap and see how they like that, and you can go on from there. Birk, what are kind of your initial thoughts on Vaportrap?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually listened to, not a lot, but a decent amount without having ever called it Vaportrap, because I'm very bad at subgenres, as people will find out during the course of this podcast. But because when we were planning this episode, I was like, oh, I don't know if I've ever really listened to Vaportrap. And you were like, I'm sure you've listened to Blank Banshee. And I was like, oh, I get it now. It totally makes sense because I know like what trap and trap drumming and stuff is, both from Blank drums and then listening to like a lot of hip hop and stuff, because trap is like that sort of style of drumming is everywhere now in hip hop, to the point where it was a joke a few years ago of have we reached peak trap? And I really like it. I really enjoyed listening to both these albums because I love taking that nostalgic kind of glitchy like samples, but not as sample heavy as some Vaporwave. And then you just, first of all, I love the sound of the drum samples typically used in trap, which we'll talk about in a second. But you take these drums and you give that sort of floaty, nostalgic, atmospheric music some structure, and it becomes much, much more listenable or kind of engaging. It's like really aggressive, but still kind of soothing.
It is. There's a lot. One of the things that really sort of like immediately draws my attention when I listen to Vaportrap is how they use hi-hats and like hi-hat patterns. Like there's a lot of these rolls of hi-hats that are really distinctive. You don't obviously hear them in pretty much any other subgenre of Vaporwave. But then also you have this super, super heavy bass. Those two elements are like, if you tell me to think of Vaportrap, those are two things that immediately come to mind.
The hi-hat stuff is especially really interesting because what you're talking about is that in trap drumming, there's a tendency to kind of switch around these subdivisions where you don't really play like a constant eighth note or something. You slip in these faster little lines. And a lot of that, what really defines trap is something that's only made possible by drum sequencers, because you always play it so fast that it just becomes a note. If a rhythm is fast enough, your ear will just hear it as a pitch.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So like if you had a hi-hat, if you programmed a drum machine to play 240 hi-hat notes per second, you would just hear a 240 hertz kind of tone.
Yeah.
Because your ear can't separate out the individual attacks.
Oh.
And like a lot of trap stuff is on the edge of that, where it just starts to kind of blur together. But you can still hear the individual little attacks, and that still kind of gives it that ringy, sort of interesting quality, as it's sort of approaching the limit of kind of what you can hear.
Yeah, obviously all of this music is made entirely possible because of synths, synthesizer technology. There's of course a lot of sampling, but it's not anywhere near like a plunderphonics level. But they use particular types of synthesizers. We'll talk about that in a little second. But what I like also about Vaportrap music is, the common sort of joke was Vaporwave creators, producers, DJs have no talent because they're just taking, Diana Ross songs and pitch shifting them or whatever. But if you show them Vaportrap, then like you can show there's a lot of skill. There's a lot of, a lot of technique in creating a lot of these Vaporwave albums or Vaportrap albums. There's a layer, I guess, texturing of and layering of multiple sounds, all layered and layered until you get something really unique. I quite enjoy that, just to try and pick out every single like source in a single track. It's very refreshing compared to a lot of vaporwave, which again relies heavily on sampling and plunderphonics, which of course I do like, but variety is the spice of life.
Agreed. Definitely a lot more. I want to phrase this carefully because we both obviously disagree with the idea of like vaporwave requiring like no talent.
Well, I mean, that's the joke. I think vaporwave does take talent, but like,
yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of like Vaportrap is kind of my go-to, like to prove to people who are like, oh, vaporwave is a joke genre.
Yeah,
vaporwave is a no talent genre. Like that's the thing I've seen every time I mention vaporwave to people who are marginally aware of it. That seems to be the knee jerk response. So.
No, yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, and that I think this has just enough recognizable craft that people kind of associate with making music that it would get them over that hump and into some of the other more plunderphonics abstract stuff.
We're doing these episodes on particular genres, but all these musicians are sort of blending and blurring the lines. You can't really define a lot of music in neat genre labels, but cloud rap is another sort of major. Some people think that Vaportrap is basically cloud rap, just there's no actual people rapping. And cloud rap often is just instrumental in itself too. Cloud rap is this, again, early 2010s genre of hip hop that relied on sort of lo-fi production technique, hazy, dreamlike kind of music and distorted vocals. And I'm barely aware of cloud rap. I like Clam's Casino a lot, and I've listened to some mixes that were really heavily cloud rap, but they were labeled as Vaportrap mixes. I read this article on Vice that talks about how, a lot of these genre tags are more marketing techniques for YouTube and other sites for their algorithms rather than actual real genres. And like,
oh yeah,
that's an interesting discussion to talk about, like genre labels as marketing exploitation or algorithm exploitation, or just a technique necessary to get your music seen by anybody. But cloud rap is certainly a major component of Vaportrap, but there are differences between them because again, Vaportrap there's almost no one there. I haven't actually seen any Vaportrap albums with people rapping in them like at all, or maybe like one or two tracks or like some distorted vocal samples, but like not like you would see in cloud rap. Cloud rap actually has rap.
I can't think of any obvious examples with like intentional lyricism that you would expect from rap or hip hop.
Yeah, so I was going through as preparing for this. I was listening to some Clam's Casino and sort of going through the comments of people on YouTube. And my favorite Clam's Casino song is I'm God, which is, again, I found on a Vaportrap mix. And somebody on there commented, this is one of those rare songs that make you feel nostalgic for something you can't even recall. And I feel like that's kind of what Vaportrap is as well. Like that's sort of like what they're trying to go for. It does make you nostalgic and trying to remember something, but you can't remember exactly what. Like there is, again, we keep referring back to clouds and dreams and sort of haziness. And when you listen to these samples, I think you'll kind of pick up what we're trying to understand. Birk, since you are the person who actually knows things about drums, I know that drums exist.
That's really good.
That is about the extent of it. Can you explain the influence of the Roland TR 808?
Yeah, so I think this ties into some of sort of nostalgic and haunted aspects of this because 808 is, really a relic of the 80s. The TR-808 was a drum synthesizer. It was like one of the first programmable ones released in the early 80s by the Roland Corporation. It was intended to be used for people who, just want to write their own stuff and don't need to rely on session musicians. But it was actually really kind of expensive and unpopular at release, and it was initially a failure. Yeah, I guarantee you that you've heard an 808 somewhere. It sounds like this. That kick, that hand clap, all of that is so iconic because even though it was initially a failure, it quickly became absorbed into like smooth funk and R&B, hip hop and EDM and new wave. Like the Talking Heads used it, and it just became this infectious instrument throughout many, many genres of music. I mean, to the point where Kanye did a whole album that's kind of a love letter to it. I think you hear these 808 samples everywhere throughout both of these albums, and really a lot of Vaportrap.
A lot of trap music also really leans heavily on the 808.
Yeah, it's everywhere in like modern hip hop, modern trap. It's really become like a genre transcending instrument outside of its original intent.
And so Vaportrap really, of course, also dives into this, picks up on this as well. But I think this is also because, again, we're, haunted music podcast. And so like, what is haunted about Vaportrap? And I think it's people who are haunted by the past production techniques of like of ways music was made in the past, the whole bedroom producer idea, someone with the garage band aesthetic to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like these current musicians who love that ideal of being able to make something and like that sound that it made, like the so-called lo-fi aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vaportrap kind of bridges into lo-fi hip hop, which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Probably have to cover that at some point.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting because the 808 definitely plays into like the haunted by ancient production techniques while still being modern prevalent, because when it came out, it definitely was not a lo-fi thing. It was very expensive. It was like over $1,000 in the 80s.
Yeah.
So like almost $4,000 today. And today, I think we have much more of a culture of kind of spending money on gadgets. I think back at the time, people were less likely to just invest in like prosumer level stuff for their garage.
Well, like the nearest competitor at the time was like $5,000 in 1980s money. So like,
that's true. It was definitely a big step in that direction. But I still think it didn't quite hit the market that they intended. But now people use it. Especially, a lot of it comes through using like patches that just emulate it, because there's not very many actual physical 808s left anymore. I
mean, if you look on Amazon or any place, there's like replicas too, or like knockoffs, there's software versions of it. Yeah. There's a whole industry of ways to emulate that sound.
Yeah. I guess, the point I was creeping towards though, is that actually using an actual 808 is like an incredibly slow and archaic process. You have to kind of set like your time signature and your tempo and your subdivision. You pick what instrument you want and you kind of press the keys of like, oh, I want hi-hats here. So you have to press like every other key. If you want like eighth note hi-hat, you have to like turn the dial to snare and press the buttons where you like want your backbeat to be, turn the dial to like hand claps, and I want hand claps here. And then there's all these little dials you can turn to change the sounds.
Wow.
So it's a lot of work to kind of program a beat into an 808 compared to today's tools.
Right. But I mean, still back in the 80s, that was still revolutionary. I mean, there's documentaries about this too.
Oh yeah.
It's definitely something, if you're interested in the history of music and you don't already know about the 808, you should, definitely learn something. But I like Vaportrap. I think it's an important subgenre of vaporwave because it's something you actually listen to in your car, and it's something you can chill out to, but you're not going to like fall asleep to. It shows like the sort of range of like what you can be haunted by. Like, it's not just concepts or end products. It's like technique. It's like, how do you make art? How do you create things? We're still haunted by like these current musicians are like looking up to their idols. Like, well, this is what they did, and I should replicate the same process in order to create new art. Like, the lo-fi is not just the using like old synthesizers. It's also like liking the sound of cassette, noise, the idea of it's the opposite of hi-fi. It's, hearing things that were once like derided. Oh, we got cassette noise in it. We got this noise. We have to get rid of it. And just embracing sort of the crappiness of the cheap technology that they had. Insert Brian Eno quote about anachronism in technology in music and art. Whatever you now find weird, ugly, uncomfortable, and nasty about a new medium will surely becomes its signature. CD distortion, the jitteriness of digital video, the crap sound of 8-bit, all of these will be cherished and emulated as soon as they can be avoided. It's the sound of failure. So much modern art is the sound of things going out of control, of a medium pushing to its limit and breaking apart. The distorted guitar sound is the sound of something too loud for the medium supposed to carry it. The blues singer with a cracked voice is the sound of an emotional cry too powerful for the throat that releases it. The excitement of grainy film, of bleached out black and white, is the excitement of witnessing events too momentous for the medium assigned to record them. Yeah, I mean, that's hauntology. That's the vaporwave aesthetic in a nutshell. Brian Eno got it.
Absolutely.
You want to get started with the albums?
Yeah, I think Mr. Eno said it better than we could, so let's move on. Okay, so that was a little bit from the track Mistakes off the 2014 album Dreams by Canadian artist 4:, usually stylized as FRCLN. So in 2014, this came out just a few years after Blank Banshee Zero really kind of blew up the genre. So I think it was very much from that era of just people making beat tapes of stuff that was interesting to them, because there's not a whole lot of direct theming in this album, I think, compared to other albums we've done on previous episodes. And I think a lot of this stuff just kind of came out and then got absorbed into mixes because, typically we try to look into and research albums that we're discussing on the show. But I feel like this one, there's really just not a lot written about it.
Yeah, this is, of course, sort of like one of the inspirations that I had for doing this podcast is that there's so many vaporwave albums of all types that like there's very little said or written or anything about these. I kind of want to like phrase it like, hey, this is interesting art, interesting music, we should talk about it. But yeah, like we always research these albums before we talk about them, but like not every album is, Floral Shop or Blank Banshee. And so like there's a lot of things that nobody's talked about. Like people listen to it. There's a lot of people who've listened to this album and I've commented on YouTube and Bandcamp about it. But like, yeah, there's no like formal criticism as far as we can tell.
Yeah, it's interesting. But overall, listening to this album is enjoyable. I liked it. I think the biggest thing for me I sort of noticed just off the top is that to me, it felt like two albums. I don't know about you, but the first half, so the first track is this Existent Part 1, and then it has kind of 7 tracks out of 14. And then there's Existent Part 2. And I feel like as soon as you hit that Part 2, we're really much more aggressive, much louder, much different style of synths and music. Did you feel that at all?
I see what you mean, but I feel in terms of the, like, there is a progression from Existent Part 1 to Existent Part 2. Like, I do see that, but I feel like it's still more consistent to me than our second album. Yeah, I there is a very sort of haziness to all the tracks. I felt like every single track does have these kind of lingering sounds that sort of, again, connotate to me clouds and dreamlike and like sort of unsure of existence. The samples are very classic vaporwave. Yeah. And you also have some of the lighter moments in like the later tracks, like Crystals, was, with that sort of, I guess, sort of video game music sampling towards the end or throughout the track. But like, I feel it's just sort of progression. It's building up throughout the entire album, which I actually kind of see in the second album as well. So, but I don't think they're too thematically different.
It's interesting. It was like, just felt striking kind of the first time I was listening to it, because the first half is so just what I think of as that smooth 808 trap.
Yeah.
And the second half is much, much more on you. Not in a bad way, but it was just like, oh, how about that?
I mean, the second half of the album does have like a lot heavier tracks. I will agree with that. Unclear in particular was really striking to me with the sort of, I guess, I want to describe it as like an accordion. I'm not sure. It's a very textured sound and I quite enjoyed it. It was probably one of my favorite tracks on the album.
Yeah.
Because of its uniqueness. But yeah, I don't know. Like like Blackout, those distorted voices I felt were pretty, I don't know. And that's track 7. That's right before, that's sort of towards the,
that's kind of the transition. If you weren't really, I guess you are paying attention more to tracks in this one because each track is much more different. There's less of kind of a flow from track to track.
Yeah. Both albums today seem to have a lot of that. Like they fully go to silence between tracks.
Yeah.
Like it's not one mix. They really do want to separate what they're trying with each track.
Yeah. It's very much like a collection of similar ideas. Then kind of grouped together into an album.
Yeah, there are some like Vicodin I really like too. It has sort of this kind of like ASMR quality to it with those samples. It's a really good build up on that. And then Usagi, I felt like he was definitely, especially the title, Usagi, is sort of, I feel like a reference to Usagi Yojimbo, which is a comic about a samurai, and it had this sort of samurai movie soundtrack quality to it. Yeah, I mean, that seemed pretty obvious to me. This is a good, I feel like, representative of Vaportrap as a genre. If you like this album, you would definitely like this other Vaportrap. It would be worth exploring. But if you didn't like this, you would not. Should probably just cut your losses. I mean, I feel like this is even better than like Blank Banshee in a lot of ways, as like sort of as a way to introduce people to Vaportrap.
That's probably fair. And I would say even not to harp on this again, but because I feel there's such a strong difference between the two halves, I actually still think you could use it as kind of a litmus test of if you like the first half but not the second, here's what you can listen to. Here's other smooth stuff that's like that. But if you like the second half and not the first half, here's other more aggressive.
Yeah, I can see that.
You get like a full spectrum of kind of what people would produce in this genre.
You know, Blank Banshee again is such a short album, and the tracks are so shorter than that. This is like, I like that this is a longer album. This is like almost, this is like an hour, isn't it?
Both are about an hour.
Yeah. So I've listened to each album several times, and by this third time I was listening to it, I would just put it on and just like didn't even notice it. I was just, but you know, nodding my head to the beat. I'm gonna have to re-listen to this again. Actually, once we're done, because I feel like maybe part of it I was paying more attention to the first half than the second half.
Maybe it also could just be me, or like what headspace I was in kind of when I first listened to it, and then that kind of informed all my other listening.
Yeah.
I want to give people an example of kind of this shift. So I think I'm actually just going to play 2 tracks.
Sure.
One from the first half and one from the second half. So let's take a listen. So that was track 2, Vicodin, which is from the first half of the album. And then you have this. And then that was the sort of more aggressive second half. That was the Usagi track we were talking about. And they are very, very different. And I think kind of representative of overall what's happened on each of those halves. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know in the comments down below whether or not I'm being reasonable.
Or if I'm just, you know, not seeing the obvious thing here.
Yeah, take sides. That's
yeah, clearly.
All good content is rooted in conflict. So one question I had, and I think you sort of pointed in that direction, is a lot of the albums we've discussed on previous episodes do have sort of stronger themes and sort of, I don't want to say purpose because I think that sounds too grandiose, but they're put together with like thematic intent, we'll say. And neither of these ones are really. I would say Fujita Scale is a little bit more than Dreams, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So I was starting to wonder, maybe this is a false division, but if these are just in mixes, I would also like them. So do I like the album or do I just like the genre?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I like, again, a lot of Vaportrap that I listen to is in mixes, like in Simpson Wave mixes or Vaportrap mixes. I don't listen to albums front to back with Vaportrap as I would, for example, Mallsoft. Like Mallsoft, you can't really mix with a lot of other music. It is so its own thing that it's very jarring to go from, you know, groceries to floral shop. So
yeah,
with Vaportrap though, it fits a lot better with musics to sort of serve as for a mixtape or, you know, a mix. I would say it's actually, yeah, I mean that kind of, maybe that's what the artists were thinking, because that's why each song is cleanly broken up with each other.
I think so. I think because the fair response is to say, I'd like every song on the album, so I like the album. But also the structure of the album maybe doesn't need to exist.
Yeah.
That's not a knock against the album or the artist, of course. I'm just thinking about it relative to other genres that we've explored.
Every subgenre of vaporwave has its own sort of message or sort of like, I don't want to say ideology per se, but like they have their own sort of like concept of what it is about. Mallsoft is very focused, for example, but like Vaportrap is more like about like the music itself. It's not about a particular, it's not about a place or like a set of memories you have or something like that. It's about music influenced by other music. So it kind of makes sense that you would fit it with other music rather than just have it be its own thing. Yeah, putting in like listening to albums front to back of Vaportrap isn't as necessary as you would with other vaporwave genres, because again, like Mallsoft is a trip through a mall. Like it's almost meant to be made for. I think it is made to be made in mixes, to be put in mixes, or to be used as the backing for a rap track. So yeah, I think you're right. Like it's a genre, not particular albums per se.
Yeah, it's an ethos of just hang out with your friends and put on some bangers. I can get behind that.
Put it on a fucking meme video, again, Simpson wave. Like,
yeah.
What would it be if, Bart wasn't having an existential crisis while he's going to church? Where would a teen pregnancy, the track be?
Well, when you put it that way, Ross.
Yeah, exactly. Segue to our next artist, which is In5X's, who is a Parisian, a French producer. I was actually looking at his Twitter account recently, and he retweeted somebody complaining about selling beats to people who are just awful, like,
oh, really?
Yeah, sell me some beats, and so In5X's is clearly still working as a musician and still trying to get by. And I would imagine a lot of these producers like supplement their income not with album sales, but with selling individual beats on tracks, for other producers or for other artists or, the collaborations. So In5X's album is called Fujita scale, which is also a term used to describe the strength of a tornado. And this is a very kind of Weather Channel themed album in a lot of ways. And so our first sample is from the track Extratropical Cyclone. I should note one of the things I really like about this album is that, and what hooked me on this album is actually it has a music video, which is a rarity in Vaporwave. And it's a really good music video. It should have a lot more views because it was really well cut. They take these beats and then they mix it with Weather Channel like video or footage from the different weather shows and news alerts. And there's some really interesting cutting on the beat between like satellite photos and like radar maps, the aesthetic or the style of these shows, and just looking at a pure visual basis as your imagery for a music video is really cool.
I really like that music video that you linked me to. So we should definitely put that one in the show notes because I think people would want to see that.
Oh, for sure.
I really like this album. I liked the actual, we can talk about whether or not it's strong, but I do like the kind of weather theming present in the album. It gave me like nice Home with Vaporwave sample vibes because there is sampling from news reports. Now, maybe not news reports you want to be nostalgic about. I think we've mentioned Weather Channel previously. It was like, oh, am I snowed out of middle school? today. Do I have to go to class?
Mm-hmm.
And these are more tornado reports and whatnot. But it is that sort of use of that weather channel sampling was a nice touch.
Yeah, I quite like it. The album art does have that sort of vaporwave, summery, breezy aesthetic with the very stylized pool, and you could see a woman's legs next to the pool and just out of frame, or the rest of her is just out of frame. I like that it's going for the sort of 80s palm tree summer breeze sort of aesthetic side of vaporwave. It certainly starts out as a very summery kind of breezy thing, and there is kind of like the same sort of transition between sort of lighter tracks to darker, more intense ones as the album progresses, which is so it's kind of like Dreams in that respect a little bit. But I feel maybe you could almost make an argument that this was stylized, like you're going a day out at the beach and like you're going from morning to night. But maybe I'm reading too much into this.
That or an approaching storm. I don't know.
Oh yeah. It's clear weather. Oh, there's that storm coming in.
Yeah, there's even a tornado in the background of the album cover.
Oh yeah, good point. I'll be honest that the music video is what hooked me on it, but I like it. Let's see, some of my favorite track is actually sort of in the middle, which is Ice Cold Ocean. Very dreamlike, has these very fun sort of hi-hat rolls and kind of a video game music aesthetic or sampling. I'm not really sure, but like there's a lot of interesting layers in it. I don't know. I'm definitely going to pull that track and put it in whatever mixes I, make for on the road or anything like that. That's easily my favorite track on the album.
I think that's a good choice.
Like with Clouds, it was interesting. Like there's not like one track that stood out hands above the others, but there was one for Fujita scale. Did you have a similar experience or?
Yeah. So I think one thing I really liked and sort of defined listening to these back to back is I think there's a lot more musical variety on this album, which I liked. Because you can look at tracks like High Pressure Research, which has like this jazzy lo-fi kind of thing going on, even though it's maybe not the best track on the album, but it's definitely one that's not like anything else on either.
Oh yeah, it's got the horn, isn't it? Yeah, the horn.
Yeah. And it really stands out.
One thing I like about this album is like the distinctiveness of each intro. The intros in a lot of songs really hooked me, like right from the beginning. And that one, High Pressure, had a really sort of I got a lo-fi hip hop vibe from it. It's very chill and kind of built up, and I quite appreciated that.
Yeah, I think overall, if it is an album about weather in some sense, I think it really hits that because a lot of the stuff is more smooth and airy trap. It still has a lot of really good ambience, even stuff that is maybe a little heavier. It still manages to do a really good job of kind of being relaxed and hazy and airy. So yeah, compared to the other album, there's I think a good bit of theming in this one, kind of talking it out now.
I see what you mean. I mean, like it's also more overtly in some ways vaporwave because we do have like Japanese vocal samples in track 10. Lost Forest trapping.
Yeah, it's a good track though. It's a good track. You also have some sort of synth wavy kind of keyboards in the next track, Cozy Boy, So Relax.
It's a fun album. Like, but I think you're right on this being a genre, not like particular albums. I would probably look for like an extended, like, give me a 2-hour Vaportrap mix, just all the bangers from the albums and put them together. Like, I probably wouldn't download the whole album to listen to for like on a plane flight or whatever, but like a mix with all the best tracks, like, ooh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because I was thinking of, could you take tracks out of this one because it does have slightly stronger theming about weather and stuff. But actually, even in like a generic Vaportrap mix, hearing random weather reports would not feel out of the ordinary at all.
Yeah, exactly.
If it was placed right, it would be fine.
I mean, this is still like, I guess that's one of the other reasons how you can separate Vaportrap from cloud rap is, like, hey, does it have shit that makes no sense otherwise, like Weather Channel samples, like, or video game samples? Does it have the Dreamcast boot up sound? That's sort of like a big litmus test, I think, for any vaporwave song. If it has Dreamcast sounds in it, it's probably vapor.
yeah, that's true. Not a lot of video game influence in this subgenre.
Not as much in Vaportrap, but I feel like you could like the sampling in this is not as overt. So I feel that there's probably, if you were to peel it back, you would probably find more samples than you could initially pick up on. Like it's subtle,
I agree.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there's some video game samples, and obviously those people speaking Japanese.
Now, Fujita scale is also sort of interesting. Just to switch gears slightly. So N5X's, in doing kind of trying to research this album and artist in general, I actually found an interesting thread about how people are not mad, but were like really concerned because he openly states that like once he releases music, he deletes all his originals.
Wow.
Like he just doesn't keep it.
Yeah.
So there's actually a fair bit of kind of haunted by copies of something that doesn't exist anymore in some sense. What does that mean in digital music, I guess?
Yeah.
He doesn't archive his own music. Like once it's out there, it's up to like Bandcamp or listeners.
Did he say why he did that?
No. So this was just somebody who was looking into it. I can link the thread of people talking about it.
I could theorize of different reasons why you do that. One, for like, I must put my old art away so I can work on new art. But two, it could be a purely legal survival strategy. Like if he's sued for copyright infringement, like I delete all my original files as soon as I'm done, because then I can't be then the court can't ask for them to find out if I've infringed on someone's copyright.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I think also I looked it up, and in the actual message, which was somebody who was just like messaged him on Facebook because he's a small artist. You can just reach out to him.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, I'd really like to pay a premium to get copies of kind of old missing album. But I understand if you're not cool with that. He's like, oh, I really appreciate it, but I delete them because I don't like them anymore.
Oh.
And when next time I drop my new tape, I'm going to delete Hydrowaves, which was his last tape at the time of this.
Wow.
So he's like, I kind of delete them because kind of once I've sort of moved on, like I've made it, it exists.
Wow.
And now I want to make something else, and I just delete it.
Wow.
He could be making that up. You don't know.
Yeah.
But
that's true.
But this was like a call on the Vaporwave subreddit a couple years ago to like archive his stuff.
Artificial scarcity, man. I mean, there's a lot of Vaporwave producers who'll put out cassettes with like of their albums, and there'll be bonus tracks on them, and then they only like release 20 copies of these cassettes, or even 10.
Or last episode, Cobalt puts in adventures and like thematic material into their cassettes.
Yeah, and they don't release it on PDF. It's just in those 10 cassettes.
Yep.
Gotta admire that commitment to artistic vision. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that vision, but at least it's a vision.
I just think it feels, I get it, because you still feel like you have control over it, but I don't know, like in the digital world, somebody's gonna have it anyway, and like you have the original DAW masters or whatever, but people are still gonna have.
There's Vaporwave is also pretty, like, in general, like people will create archives and put them up on file sharing sites because it's not like real music. It's not that actually, people don't actually copyright it, so might as well have 10 gigs of Vaporwave that you can just freely download, because why not? So there will always be that floating around.
I saw that was sort of an interesting aspect of kind of this artist.
Yeah, but that's pretty much all I have to say about this. Both these albums are good intros to Vaportrap, but I feel Clouds is better for that. But I mean, they're both worth listening to. Yeah,
I agree. And if you like them, there's infinity Vaportrap mixes out there to kind of dig deeper into this.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy this exploration of Vaportrap. We're going to be sticking with vaporwave subgenres next episode. We will be discussing hypnagogic albums. Hypnagogic is the term for the period in which you are right when you're in bed and right about to fall asleep. So you're not fully conscious and you're not fully asleep yet. It's fun, happy music.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of really switching gears in that, this episode was vaporwave, but less sleepy.
Mm-hmm.
The next episode will be vaporwave, but sleepier.
Very sleepy, but very good.
Yes.
It's one of the more prominent subgenres of vaporwave.
Mm-hmm.
The two albums we already picked are, I like them both. I can't wait to talk about them. I am at Ross Payton on Twitter.
I am at Birk McBirkinson. And as a podcast, we are at Night Clerk Radio.
Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast or your podcasting app of choice. And please spread the word if you like this podcast. Tell your friends about it. Shout it from the hilltops or at your local mall food court. We will surely appreciate that.
Make sure you download them because I'm deleting the audition projects when I'm done.
He's not. Or is he?
Am I?
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.